Sheriff Glenn Maddox had already opened the town ordinance booklet before Adrian Holloway knew why the sheriff had stopped beside his booth. Maddox held one finger under a section titled Temporary Vendors and Commercial Activity. On Adrian's table sat a club sandwich, a coffee mug, reading glasses, and 2 legal folders. Nothing else. No brochures, no product samples, no business cards. Adrian had been inside Harper's Grill for about 20 minutes. He had spoken only to Denise Walker, the waitress who brought his lunch. Maddox looked at the folders first. "You doing business in Millhaven?" Adrian set down his fork. "I'm eating lunch. That wasn't what I asked." Deputy Luke Garner stood several feet behind the sheriff. Luke had followed Maddox inside after they parked near the courthouse square. He had expected coffee. Instead, Maddox had stopped the moment he noticed Adrian, a black man in a charcoal suit. Out-of-county plates on the sedan outside. Legal papers on the table. Maddox looked at those details as if they belonged together. "You meeting clients here?" "No." "Selling services?" "No." Maddox tapped the ordinance booklet. "Temporary commercial activity requires registration in this county." Denise passed with a coffee pot. "He hasn't been selling anything," she said. "He ordered lunch and sat right there." Maddox barely turned toward her. "I'm handling it." At the counter, 2 local contractors wore company shirts with phone numbers printed across their backs. A stack of invoices sat between their plates. Maddox had greeted both men by name when he entered. He had not asked either one for a permit. Adrian noticed. He did not point it out. Instead, he looked at the ordinance booklet. "What commercial activity did you observe?" Maddox's mouth tightened. "I'm asking the questions." "I understand. I'm asking what triggered the vendor inquiry." Luke knew the ordinance. Most deputies used it for door-to-door crews, temporary sales tents, or people moving through neighborhoods offering roofing, paving, or repair work. He had never seen it used on someone eating alone. Maddox extended his hand. "Driver's license." Adrian did not reach for his wallet. "If you can identify the regulated activity you're investigating, I'll respond accordingly." Maddox glanced toward the counter. Several customers immediately looked down. One man stirred coffee that no longer needed stirring. Denise stayed near the register. Luke watched her give a small shake of her head. Still, he said nothing. Maddox closed the ordinance booklet. "You're interfering with a lawful compliance check." Adrian remained seated. "I haven't interfered with anything. I asked what activity falls under the ordinance." Maddox stepped closer. "Stand up." Adrian removed his reading glasses and placed them beside the coffee mug. That was all. He stood. Maddox took his wrist and brought one arm behind him. Luke reached for his cuffs when the sheriff asked. For a second, Luke held them without moving. He had heard Denise. He had seen the table. He knew what the ordinance normally covered. Maddox looked at him. "Deputy." Luke handed over the cuffs. The metal closed around Adrian's wrists. Nobody in the diner spoke. Denise put the coffee pot on the warmer, harder than necessary. Maddox walked Adrian toward the door. Adrian did not argue with the sheriff on the way out. He looked once toward Luke, then toward the ordinance booklet still tucked beneath Maddox's arm. The cruiser pulled away from Harper's Grill a few minutes later. At the Millhaven County Sheriff's Office, booking clerk Marla Jenkins received the custody sheet from Maddox. She entered the incident number, then stopped at the offense line. Interference with transient vendor identification inquiry. Marla opened the city code index beside her terminal. She found the ordinance. Registration requirement. Administrative fine. Compliance notice. She read the page again. Then she looked at Luke. What was he selling? Luke stared at the custody sheet. For the first time since leaving the diner, he had no sheriff standing between the question and the answer. Marla Jenkins kept the city code index open beside her terminal. What was he selling? Deputy Luke Garner looked at the custody sheet again. Nothing on the page answered her. Sheriff Glenn Maddox was already walking toward his office. "Put him in holding," he said. "We'll finish the paperwork after." Marla did not move to the next screen. The offense code requires commercial activity. Maddox stopped. He refused identification during a vendor check. That tells me what happened after the check started. Marla tapped the ordinance section. What started it? Luke felt Maddox look at him. He had been at Harper's Grill from the beginning. Adrian Holloway had not gone table to table. He had not handed anyone a card. He had not offered a service. He had not taken money from anyone except to pay for lunch. Maddox pulled out the chair beside Marla's desk. Use apparent commercial activity. Marla turned the custody sheet toward Luke. You were there. Luke knew what was being asked without anyone saying it directly. If he wrote that Adrian had been conducting apparent commercial activity, the arrest would look cleaner. He picked up the pen. Maddox waited. Luke wrote one sentence. Subject was seated alone, eating a meal. No sales contact observed by this deputy. He put the pen down. Maddox read it. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Luke did not answer. In the holding area, Adrian sat on a metal bench while the booking process continued. He had provided his name and date of birth when Marla explained that the information was required for custody intake. That was different from the demand in the diner. This time, there was an actual booking process. Marla entered the information exactly as given. Occupation. Adrian answered, Federal Judiciary. Her fingers paused for half a second before she continued typing. Maddox heard it from across the room. He walked back. Federal Judiciary doing what? Adrian looked at Marla, not Maddox. United States District Judge. Nobody reacted dramatically. Marla simply checked the next field. Maddox gave a short laugh. Of course you are. He told Marla to send the custody request to Magistrate Peter Raines. Raines was working the afternoon rotation from the county courthouse annex. He received the electronic request less than 15 minutes later. The request described Adrian as interfering with a transient vendor identification inquiry. Raines opened the attached ordinance. Then he called the sheriff's office. Marla answered, I need the underlying commercial conduct. She looked toward Maddox. He's asking what activity triggered the ordinance. Maddox took the phone. Suspicious temporary business activity. Out-of-county subject. Refused to identify. Raines repeated the question. What was he selling, offering, or soliciting? Maddox leaned against the desk. That's what we were trying to determine. There was a pause. You started a vendor investigation before determining whether he was a vendor? Maddox's grip tightened around the receiver. He was evasive. That isn't commercial activity. Raines asked for Adrian's full name. A few minutes later, he checked the Public Federal Judiciary Directory from his courthouse workstation. Adrian Holloway appeared there. Sitting United States District Judge. The title changed the seriousness of the situation. It did not change the ordinance. Raines called back. I'm not approving continued custody on this submission. Maddox straightened. You're releasing him because he's a judge? No. I'm releasing him because you still haven't identified the conduct that made the vendor ordinance apply. Marla began the release process. Luke stood near the property counter while Adrian's belongings were returned. Adrian took his wallet, phone, keys, and legal folders. He did not look at Maddox. Before leaving, he asked Marla for the incident number. Then he asked Luke one question. Did you write what you saw? Luke nodded. Yes. I'm assuming. Adrian left it there. Outside, he called his chambers and reported that he would be delayed. Court security documented the custodial incident because a sitting federal judge had been detained while traveling. That notification eventually reached the State Public Integrity Office. Meredith Shaw was assigned the initial review. She requested only the records connected to the current incident, the vendor ordinance, the custody submission, Luke's observation, the diner's statement, and the sheriff's current enforcement guidance. By late afternoon, one additional document arrived from the county administrator. It was a budget memo from Mayor Curtis Vaughn. The language was ordinary. Visitor compliance activity was below projection. Municipal citation revenue was also below projection. Departments were encouraged to improve enforcement consistency before the end of the quarter. Meredith read the 2 lines twice. The arrest at Harper's Grill had started with one man sitting alone over lunch. Now there was a second question. Had Maddox been looking for a violation, or had the town already taught him to look for someone who could be turned into one? Meredith Shaw began with the easiest question. What had Adrian Holloway actually done inside Harper's Grill? Denise Walker answered first. He had ordered lunch, opened 2 legal folders, and remained in the same booth until Sheriff Glenn Maddox approached him. She had not seen Adrian offer a service. She had not seen anyone meet him for business. She had not heard a single customer complain. Luke Garner gave the same account. Then Meredith placed the transient vendor ordinance on the table. It covered temporary sales, solicitation, and short-term commercial activity. None of those things appeared in the diner statements. Maddox sat across from her with county counsel beside him. "I had discretion to investigate." Meredith agreed. "Investigate what?" Maddox pointed to Adrian's out-of-county vehicle, his suit, and the legal papers on the table. Those facts described a traveler carrying documents. They did not describe a vendor. "He refused identification," Maddox said. "That happened after you opened the vendor inquiry." The sequence mattered because Maddox had never identified the conduct that gave him vendor enforcement authority in the first place. Meredith moved to Luke. She placed his handwritten booking observation in front of him. Subject was seated alone, eating a meal. No sales contact observed by this deputy. "Why didn't you say that in the diner?" Luke looked at the sentence. "Because the sheriff had already decided what he was doing." "Did you agree with him?" "No." "Did you stop him?" Luke shook his head. "No." That answer became part of Luke's own finding. He received a formal reprimand for participating in a detention he had reason to question. He was removed from Maddox's direct chain of supervision during the investigation. But his booking statement mattered for another reason. Luke wrote it before anyone at the sheriff's office knew Adrian was a federal judge. He had corrected the factual record before Adrian's title changed the risk for everyone around him. Mayor Curtis Vaughn's role was narrower. The budget memo did not tell deputies to target black motorists or outsiders. It tied enforcement performance to projected citation revenue. Department emails showed Maddox responding by emphasizing visitor compliance, temporary vendor violations, parking enforcement, and other low-level categories that generated fines quickly. The incentive did not prove why Maddox chose Adrian. It showed why weak enforcement contacts were being rewarded instead of questioned. The county council removed citation revenue from law enforcement performance measures. Vaughn lost oversight of the public safety budget. After the ethics review found that his office had mixed municipal revenue goals with enforcement priorities, he announced he would not seek another term. Maddox faced the strongest consequences. The public integrity investigation sustained 3 findings. He opened a vendor investigation without observable commercial activity. He converted an administrative ordinance into a custodial detention without a valid predicate. Afterward, he pressured a subordinate to describe commercial conduct the subordinate had not seen. State prosecutors filed official misconduct and unlawful restraint charges under the fictional state code governing Millhaven. Before his scheduled removal hearing, Maddox resigned. His resignation agreement ended his supervisory authority, department credentials, county vehicle access, and eligibility for future law enforcement employment with Millhaven County. The county did something else that mattered more to Adrian. His custody entry was formally voided. The vendor-related offense was removed from the active county record, and the disposition identified the detention as unsupported rather than leaving it sitting in the system as a dismissed accusation. The council released the public integrity findings with the same explanation. The problem was not that Maddox had accidentally arrested an important judge. The vendor ordinance had never applied to the conduct observed in the diner. Adrian had no role in deciding any of those consequences. When Meredith offered to send him the final disposition, he accepted the document. Any civil claim arising from the detention would be handled outside his chambers. Any prosecution of Maddox would go before a judge with no connection to Adrian. That separation mattered. Being wronged did not give Adrian permission to become investigator, prosecutor, and judge in his own case. Millhaven changed the vendor enforcement process before the next quarter began. The old form started with identification information. The replacement started somewhere else. Observed offer, sale, solicitation, or commercial transaction. The officer had to describe the regulated conduct before proceeding to vendor identification or compliance. If that section could not be completed, the vendor workflow stopped. A different investigation could still begin if separate facts supported it. But the town could no longer use a business ordinance simply because an officer wanted to know who somebody was. Luke stayed with the department. Months later, he handled a complaint about 2 men offering driveway repairs door to door. This time he documented the sales pitch first. Then he checked whether they were registered. The sequence was simple. It was also the sequence Maddox had skipped. Adrian returned to his federal courthouse after the Millhaven review closed. He placed the disposition letter in a personal file and returned to the cases waiting on his desk. He never went back to Harper's Grill for a victory lunch. There was nothing there he needed to prove. Back in Millhaven, Marla Jenkins placed a new stack of enforcement cards beside the booking terminal. Later that afternoon, another deputy brought her a vendor complaint. Before he entered a name, Marla pointed to the first box. What did they offer? The deputy checked his notes and began writing. The new field asked what was being sold before it asked who was selling it. This story is fictional.